I was recently visited by Xavier Martinez of the Bonsai Retreat, and we tackled some beginner bonsai questions. You might be surprised at some of the answers. Keep watching. I'm joined here by Xavier of the Bonsai Retreat, and we both asked for viewers to send us their questions, and we're going to rattle through offering a little bit of advice and our differing opinions on the answers to these. And I think what you might find interesting is how different people approach these different topics and subjects. So,
can I do a little proviso?
yeah.
I'm a hobbyist. I've been doing it for 20 odd years, and the one thing I'm very aware of is that I haven't done any professional training. I haven't done anything. I've read a few books, YouTube. Most of my advice is based on experience in my garden, and I'm a big one about microclimates and how even a garden, from the difference between you and me maybe, can affect a tree and how it develops so differently. So
Yeah.
I'm certainly say whatever I say is based on my little corner of the world in Grantham. But
Take it with a pinch of salt.
take it with a pinch of salt, yeah, definitely.
And the saying goes to anything I have to say, you have far more years of
So
experience.
if I've got a
of
bigger
bonsai.
pinch of salt,
Yes.
mine's a tablespoon
You've
of
got
salt.
more years of experience of bonsai than I have, but we're tackling beginner questions here, so hopefully these are topics that we can offer some good insight on.
Hopefully.
I know both you and I have done videos on like the best 5 beginner trees, so we have an opinion on that. What tree would you be advising someone who's new to bonsai to be working on?
Japanese larch, you can wire it and bend it. You can take it from a 1-2 year sap, which costs £1.40 maybe. You get 20 of them. I know you've done that. That's how I started my bonsai hobby way back in 2002.
There's a great company, isn't there, called, I think it's Three Fat Pigs, or
I've got 2 of them here.
or larch field trees, who are based in Northern Ireland, and you can find them on eBay and also on Amazon, and they're a great source for getting bare rooted larch trees. And I know that a lot of the people who started larch forests or even sort of individual larch trees have got bundles of trees from there at a really good price, and it gives you lots of trees to work on and to style. So I think I agree. I think larch, they're a tree that has a lot of interest all year round.
Yeah.
So they've got,
and the bark goes so crackly and old looking so quickly. It's amazing. It's what you want, isn't it? In the end, you want a tree that looks really old.
yeah, and as they mature, they get little cones on them as well, which is a beautiful little feature of them as a tree.
And the seeds from those cones produce bonsai. I have got little saplings growing from my bonsai larch, so I'm hoping they'll be bonsai size.
What about other trees then? So we've got larch. What about something like Cotoneaster? I think what you need to be looking for as a beginner to bonsai is you want to bear in mind you want something with small foliage.
You can't go far wrong with the good old dwarf azalea. You go to your garden centre, again, very early on. We like flowers, don't we? And they flower in April, May.
Yeah.
Get beautiful flowers on them. They're probably this big. They're not difficult to deal with. You can prune them, and they give you so much enjoyment early in the year. You get the flowers.
You say that, but I bought a dwarf azalea from a garden centre, and it was a bonsai that I bought, and it struggled. I think when I bought it, it probably wasn't very well initially, and it only had a bit of foliage on there. The first year it flowered, second year it struggled, third year it just died.
Well, you said one word there. You bought it was it already as a bonsai?
It was I shan't name the...
Okay.
I shan't name who supposedly started as bonsai.
But I mean, I'm looking at, I'm a great one certainly for azalea type stuff. End of the season, like you might try and get for Japanese maple, you go to the bargain section of your garden centre, and we all have those dwarf azaleas everywhere because they don't flower. No one wants them, and the leaves are looking a bit yellow, but they're in normal soil. They're in the plant mix, and you can take it home. You can do your first practice repot it in the spring, and whack it into a bonsai pot, and it'll be flowering a week later. And the ones I bought from a nursery, first time I'd ever used them, done anything with them, they flowered every year. Lovely pink, white flowers. Doesn't matter how badly I treat them, and I don't fertilise them, I should do. Brilliant. And so if you want a flowering tree that's easy to work with, then just go for your dwarf azalea.
I should have sent my struggling dwarf azalea to you for some care and attention.
Well, maybe you shouldn't have, but it was a bonsai you bought, wasn't it? So who knows what had been done to it before.
It had some beautiful movement in the branches. It had obviously been wired very meticulously and carefully. But it was just struggling, and it died on me. Broke my heart.
And I know what I love most about them. Come the summertime, when the flowers have all gone, you can prune them really hard. And they're basally dominant, which means they like to shoot out from the bottom, the base, I suppose that's basally, yeah. And you get all this sense of being able to develop ramification. And it doesn't take much work from yourselves. You just need to be good with a scissors or whatever and cut them.
What about the good old Japanese maple? How about that as a beginner bonsai tree?
I got 100 Japanese maple saplings, katsuras, in 2014 for about, I don't know, £8. And they were little, well, they were barely anything. They were a year old. And I planted them out in nursery beds. I planted some in pots, and I'd prune them. And, you know, Japanese maple, you know the leaves. They're lovely. They look gorgeous. But I found they took a long time to develop.
Yeah.
And if you're not particularly experienced, when you start doing cuts on them, they've got what you'd call a really soft wood. I've got maples that have still got scarring from my original ministrations. Is that a word, ministrations? Yeah. So yeah, they look lovely, and you know they are very, very responsive to pruning, and they can be as difficult as you make them. So they're still very good for a beginner, but yeah, they're not so happy if you mistreat them, and so they'll scar easily from wire if you don't keep an eye on them, and they do get caught with a few more common pests as well.
They're very fussy about how wet the soil gets, aren't they? They don't like to have wet roots, and that causes rot and verticillium wilt and all sorts of issues like that. Yeah. So what about an indoor tree?
Well, you know, ficus. I've got ficus, and in fact, I'm sure you've got a ficus that might have once started in my retreat. I find them absolutely fantastic. I have had Chinese elm, but anyone who knows me knows that I'm a big advocate that Chinese elm are an outdoor tree. If you bring it indoors, you're bringing problems in with it. That's not to say you can't keep it indoors. I know people who do really well with it.
They will struggle.
But you've got to worry about where you put it, whether there's draft, all sorts of things.
Sufficient light levels.
Yeah,
whether it's sat over a radiator. Yeah.
Whereas with the ficus, I find it can be a sort of bit of a, just as long as you water it when it needs
it's just happy to be there.
Put it in a windowsill, and it's relatively happy to be there. The only thing you need to watch with those is when you bring it in, give it a good spray first, because it'll bring the bugs in with it. But yeah, so you can't go wrong with a ficus, and they're great for cuttings. So if you want more ficus, and you literally just need to cut them straight into some soil, yeah, very, very low maintenance, and give you enjoyment very quickly. I think they need to be aware of where they're going to put it. It sounds silly and obvious, but that's where you fall foul with the, you know, do I get a Chinese elm or I'm going to get an indoor tree?
Yeah.
Am I going to get an outdoor tree? Where am I going to put this thing? Have I got children? Have I got pets, animals? Have I got sunlight coming in? There's a lot of trees like junipers and oaks that really want the sun. And if you've got a garden that doesn't give it to them, then you may spend a lot of money for something and your garden just isn't set to optimize to make it look its best.
I think a lot of the time people who are new to bonsai, they might have been gifted a tree, or they may not particularly be green-fingered or know exactly what it is they're looking for, and often they will choose an outdoor tree and insist on trying to grow that indoors, and they're just insufficient light.
Yeah.
The tree dries out, or they don't water that tree enough. So I think it's right. You need to understand where you're expecting to grow that tree, and then choose a species that will thrive in that environment. So if you're keeping a tree in the toilet or whatever, in the bathroom where there's low light levels, you need something that's going to thrive indoors in a low light environment. The majority of deciduous trees, if you were to put them in that environment, within months certainly within a year, they're likely to have died. So I think it's important that you consider that. That's one of the critical things, isn't it?
And I think probably the next thing is, because there's a whole range of stuff, and most people will know there's loads of things they can pick, but also, what do you want from it? So am I buying a tree because I want to impress family, I want to enjoy looking at it? I mean, I look in your garden, there's so many trees that I could just stare at and look and enjoy. Or have I got busy fingers and I actually want to be doing stuff with it? So that might change your choice of why or what tree you're buying.
I think an important consideration as well is if you find something that grows well in your native environment, ideally an outdoor tree, because outdoor trees, I think, probably require a little bit less care. Then if you can find something that grows locally and grow that as a bonsai tree, then you're more likely to succeed than if you pick something that's not native to your country or your environment, or doesn't like the levels of moisture or the how much rain you get.
You can't go far wrong with a dawn redwood. Let's be honest. I like dawn redwoods, and ever since you taught me wet feed, mine have done ever so well.
Yeah, dawn redwood don't like to dry out. They're one of the few trees that don't mind to be sat in water. For someone who's getting just started into the hobby of bonsai, there might be some anxiety about what tools they should be using. There are lots of different tools and lots of different types of tools, whether they're steel, carbon, all the various array of tools. But if you're new to bonsai, what are the tools that you think that you absolutely need as a minimum?
You need some pruning shears, but to be fair, you can use scissors. No, you need pruning shears because you need the edge. You need a cutter, whether it be a knob cutter or some sort of thing that'll cut through a branch. You can use secateurs, but I think actually I used to think you could use anything. I've seen people do it. But if you're actually taking this up as a hobby, my first tool roll was, I think it cost £15, and that's not back when aeroplanes still didn't fly. It was the very, very basic set, and it had what you use: scissors, wire cutters, it had little pliers, it had a rake hook. But the scissors are what you used, and the big fat scissors where you cut the roots and everything else. It's not unreasonable perhaps to say, if I like bonsai, I am going to invest in a real budget tool roll. And I'll say that because I have spent a fortune on more specialized cutters and that. And do you know what I always use? I always go back to my original £2 cutters because they sharpen easily. There's something about them. They work and they cost nothing. I think you probably, if you looked for a basic bonsai tool roll set, you can find them on all the usual places. I think that's probably a good investment. Get it for Christmas. Get someone to buy it for you. I'm sure they would.
And I think a lot of the tools that are available are very specific to a particular job. So you have cutters that have curved edges, or you have knob cutters for taking out big bites out of trunks. And I think unless you have that job to do on your tree, I think you can get by with a pair of secateurs. And if you're wiring a tree, then you probably need some wire cutters for cutting through that wire rather than blunting the edge.
Yeah,
on your secateurs.
I think again it comes down to if you're going to invest in a hobby and you're going to buy some tools, then sometimes getting the base set it's not a false it could be a false economy to think I'm not going to do that. If you want to try it, get the basic tools first.
I think a lot of people are critical of the cheap tools that you can get for £10 for a pair of cutters.
Brilliantly.
But they work.
I'm not.
And if you're just getting started, then it's as good a place to start as anywhere.
Look, I'm not joking. I am still using the original cutters and the root shears from my first ever pack that I bought, that was bought for me 20 years ago for £8-9.
I think if you're not pruning and working on hundreds of trees, you're not a commercial bonsai nursery, then you don't really need to worry about a £60 or £120 pair of shears. The 12 quid.
I've never paid more than 40, and the ones that I bought for 40 are rubbish as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so you can get by really on fairly simple tools, but if you're doing more specific jobs, then you need the more specific tools for that job.
Yeah.
So you can get by on fairly inexpensive tools.
And if you eat Chinese, there's your chopstick. Bonsai enthusiasts love chopsticks.
Here's a whole can of worms. Can you explain the importance of proper soil selection for bonsai beginners? I know I did a whole video where I covered the aspects of soil.
It's a very good video, by the way. I did enjoy it.
I always say if you ask 10 bonsai enthusiasts about bonsai soil, you get 11 answers. It's one of the few topics that causes a lot of disagreement.
There's one other, jade, but we won't go there.
Well, they're not proper bonsai, are they? But a lot of different bonsai enthusiasts or bonsai growers will use a slightly different variant on sort of basic soil mixers. And I think what's important is not so much what's actually in the soil, you know, what are the component parts of that soil. It's more about what are the properties that soil gives you. So the things that are vital for your plants to survive is they need aeration. There needs to be some amount of retaining water for the plants, but it also needs contradictory. It needs to be free draining. So you don't want your trees sat in a lot of boggy, wet soil, because that will starve the roots, deny them the oxygen, and the tree just rots. So any soil, I think, for your trees that offers those, and also probably a certain amount of holding and giving back nutrients as well. Any soil that can provide those basic things is going to be an okay soil. It might not necessarily be the ideal soil for your particular tree, because I think different trees have different requirements in terms of how much water they like. You know, whether they mind their roots being a little bit on the damp side or the dry side.
Do you want the truth? Okay. For the first 10 years, probably 15 years, all of my bonsai trees were in potting mix. Because they're in potting mix, they held the water a bit more. I wasn't really aware of the whys and wheres then, so I didn't water them as regularly. I only watered them when they were drying out. Did they die because they were in potting mix? No, of course they didn't. They were happy as Larry. There are certain reasons why, you know, once we get more experience, we might say, oh, I go for a thoroughly organic only mix or non-organic mix, which is basically stones. It's because we're starting to look at the roots and things, and I'm sure that's for a different subject. But the bottom line is, can you grow it in potting mix? Well, they do it at the nurseries all the time. Will that have a different effect on your tree? Of course it will. But certainly, if all you can afford is your potting mix, then get your potting mix, and then perhaps, dare I say, I'm going to say something controversial. Maybe you can get some 2, 3, 5 mil gravel, mix it in so that you can actually create a little bit of variation. As you get better at it, or as you get more experience, you might get rid of the gravel. But first 10 years, mine was basically potting mix and gravel.
I think the understanding of bonsai soil has changed over, I don't know, the last 30 years or even longer than that. If you look at the books by people like Peter Chan and look at their recommendations for bonsai soil from 30 years ago, that's different from what people are recommending now. But it's more about the properties of the soil as opposed to what the actual components of the soil are. So I know more modern soil mixers talk about mixes of akadama, pumice and lava, and even more recently perhaps suggestions that we avoid the lava because that might introduce some issues as well. But provided the soil is giving your tree what it requires, then I don't think it really matters too much exactly what that soil is, provided, you know, you've got the aeration, you're giving the tree the water, and it's got some amount of drainage in there.
I mean, if we're talking about if we're starting, as we move through the hobby, then we start recognizing that, you know, I'm 20 plus years down. I'm pretty well three quarters.
There's a big difference, isn't there, between a Japanese maple that you bought from the garden centre last year and that you're just starting out, and something that's 120 years old that's massively refined and has got really fine roots.
You brought out a perfect point, and it's something that took me a long time to learn. Unless you've got to the stage where you're actually getting to the point where it's a bonsai, if you're developing a tree, then it's perfectly happy in a standard nursery mix. It thrives, the roots are high and fine. And you'll soon see, because if you start watering it and the water's pooling or you're getting a lot of green algae on the top, then you know that it's in a dangerous condition. It's starting to collect water. It's going to rot the roots. So you'll see the visible signs very quickly if there's a problem. Then you do something about it. But
I'll say, if you get 10 bonsai enthusiasts, probably one of the few topics that will cause them to come to blows in short time.
You only need to mention soil on a video title, and you already get a little bit of the negative comments coming through. And and again, it's specific to your location, your rainfall, your sunlight. There's so much to do. I'm going to go from what the mistakes I've made. And the first one is, in all my enthusiasm, trying to get a non-bonsai or whatever into a small pot too soon. You know, no matter how much you try, of course it is. We do this because we want it to look like a bonsai. We want a bonsai tree. And we take our garden centre or nursery centre plant, and whether we apply wire to it or not, or cut it or not, is neither here nor there. What we're trying to do is get it into one of these nice blue pots. And we cut all the roots off, we jam it in, and then we expect it to grow and develop. And the first big lesson that took me so long to learn is that as soon as you put it in that environment, you are not going to get the thing to grow, thicken. The trunk is pretty well going to stay as it is. I mean, over time, a long time, it will develop, but nothing like what you probably in your mind want to see happen.
I always say that when you put a tree into a ceramic bonsai pot like this, it effectively puts its development into slow motion. Because it's an artificial environment with restricted access to resources, then that naturally causes a slowdown in the tree's development. And if it's a refined tree, that's exactly what we want. But if it's not a refined tree, if it's a tree that's developing, you've suddenly slowed down the rate at which that development happens. The other thing is, I think, that beginners need to bear in mind is that bonsai is a fusion of art and horticulture.
Sorry, but can you say that again? That's poetic.
It's one of those things I keep saying, and I hear myself saying it and thinking, oh, shut up.
No. But go on, put your hands up with a big like if you thought that was a real... I like that.
Bonsai is a fusion of art and horticulture. It's about taking a living, growing thing and shaping it artistically. But the key part of that is the horticulture, because if the tree's dead, it doesn't matter how you style it, you've still got a dead bonsai tree.
Yeah.
So the important thing is you need to respect the tree and the horticulture of the tree. You need to treat it as though you want it to live.
What is that, by the way?
This particular one is Paul Scarlet Hawthorn.
I've been sitting there looking at it, and this is the example of what you can do. It's a very, very young tree. It's something that anyone could really, if you've got a whip, put some wire on, put some bends in it, and it can look like that. I actually really like how that looks. Do you know how old it is?
I can tell you how long I've had it.
Yeah.
It's just about 3-4 years.
Yeah.
This was actually the top of a taller tree, and I believe that the tree perhaps had been made to look very artificial. There were lots of sort of coils and twists all the way up, and it didn't look right. So I took this off the top of the tree.
How did you do that?
To create this tree using a technique which is called air layering, which is a means of getting the tree to put out roots at a particular point, so that then that can be separated from the parent tree and grown as an independent tree. But the parent tree had this sort of artificial, very sort of manufactured look to it, and it was a bit overdone, if I'm honest.
I like that.
But what I would advise anyone who's new is, when it comes to pruning your trees, whether it's pruning the branches or the roots, just don't go too hard on it.
Yeah, made that mistake.
Don't get carried away, or the health of the tree may well suffer. You know, if you cut off the foliage at the wrong time of year, that foliage might not come back, and so the tree is depleted of energy. Or if you cut off the roots, it's got no means of taking up moisture. So you need to do it in proportion, and it needs to be balanced and considered.
Yeah. I've made that mistake as well.
Haven't we all?
You should do a video all about the mistakes growing bonsai. Video.
So I'm here with Xavier of the Bonsai Retreat, and we're answering beginner bonsai questions. One of the key aspects of bonsai is repotting trees. How often should a beginner be repotting their trees?
It's not about how, there's no defined period. It depends on the tree entirely itself. The least amount of time to repot a tree, the better, because it's a lot of stress. Imagine if someone came in, took you out of bed, cut your legs off, and then put you into another bed. You wouldn't be very pleased and you wouldn't recover very quickly. So the actual advice is when the tree needs it, you repot it. And there are some telltale signs, which I'm sure Jason could tell us about, when to repot. And the first one I'll give you is if you try to water your tree and the water just runs off the top, that means the water's not getting down, it's not getting into the roots. So you're going to have a problem. That would be one of the signs for repotting a tree. That could happen after 1 year, it could happen after 4 years. So be very careful about saying, I must do it every 6 months or 12 months, which is certainly a mistake I made in the early years.
You also see as well that as the roots are swelling the pot, the tree often will begin to lift up out of the pot or sit higher in the pot. That's a sure sign that the roots are beginning to circle around and that the tree's in need of a repot.
But it is also worth recognising there are certain trees that really are very profuse with the roots. And anyone who knows me knows I love my Japanese larch. A Japanese larch, generally, when it's developing or growing, will need repotting every year because you pull it out, there's going to be absolutely tons of roots.
Yeah.
Chinese elm, probably going to be the same. Even your Japanese maples, especially anything developing, probably you'd be wanting to look at every couple of years.
Pines and junipers often, they need repotting less often than that. You can get away with maybe up to 5 years in time. And I think they're really quite fussy about you interfering with the roots. And they mind less about the roots being quite sort of constricted or constrained within that pot.
And I suppose the question I'd say is, if you forgot to repot, would you be worried? And I'll say now, when I first started the hobby, I bought a Japanese white pine, I had a Korean hornbeam, which is a deciduous tree, and I got bored. They sat in the back of the garden for 8 years, untouched. I didn't look at them, I didn't fertilize them, I certainly didn't repot them. And then I came back into the hobby, and they went from being really healthy to this beginner bonsai enthusiast, thinking, I need to repot it, and actually they went downhill for a while. They will, so I know some bonsai artists who actually advocate not repotting a lot of the time. And the tree gets used to the microenvironment it's in. So, that's actually, I'd say, don't be worried if you miss a repot and panic.
I think one of the things I always say as well in bonsai is when you are working on a tree or you do some action on a tree, do it purposefully and know and understand what it is you're trying to achieve and why you're doing it at that particular time and what the end result is. So don't necessarily feel that you've just bought a bonsai tree from somewhere, I need to repot it, because that's what you do with bonsai.
I'll repot it, I'll feed it, I'll wire it, I'll prune it, I'll do it all in the same week.
And that's not what the tree is requiring. I think to understand how often to repot your trees as well, I think it's important to understand what the species of tree is and what the requirements are for that particular species of tree. And I think that goes not just for repotting, but any action that you do on that tree. You get a white pine or you get a larch or some other type of tree. If that's the first time you've encountered that tree, if that's the first of that species in your collection, go away and do a little bit of research and understand what are the care requirements for that exact species of tree. It's not a generic bonsai, it's a particular species of tree that lives in a particular environment that has particular care needs. And I think you need to bear that in mind for all of your different species of tree.
I'll say now, I've been doing over 20 years, and every year I still revisit books, I look at my online sources, I'll look at my favorite YouTube videos, just to remind myself, I know the answers, but I still look because I don't want to get it wrong. And there's nothing wrong with doing a lot of research. And as you get more experience, yes, you become confident in what you're doing, but never ever get I was going to say laissez-faire about it.
I think you can never have too much information, but you can almost certainly have too little.
Yeah. Oh, it's. I mean, as soon as you say it, you think, "Wow, that must be really important." Which is why you would pick a tree that's local to you if you want to absolutely optimize the growing of that tree. You'd say a Chinese elm or a Japanese black pine, and you think, "Oh, why do they do different things?" Well, they're on the slopes of a volcano, or they get humid, or they get monsoon conditions. It matters because it directly affects the way the growing patterns and what you can do with them are. As a beginner, with the material you're probably going to be looking at or growing, unless you're in a more extreme climate, I've found that you can be pretty. If it's in the nursery centre, you can.
There are, for example, a lot of deciduous trees that grow in similar environments or similar climates, and a lot of those you can treat very similarly. But then again, there are other species of tree like black pines or Japanese white pines that grow in very specific types of environments, and we need to ape or mimic those types of environments.
I suppose you brought up a point with me a few months ago about your white pines. You make a point of in the winter, you keep them out of the rain. You might put them under a bench or somewhere because the white pines definitely don't like sitting in water.
They grow at the top of mountains. They're higher elevation mountain trees. And what that means is if you imagine these things are sat in a sort of gravelly, gritty soil growing at the top of a mountain, if it should rain, that rainfall just drains away almost instantly. So they're sat in a very dry environment. So they don't mind being on the dry side, but they absolutely hate having their roots in water.
And certainly, so it can't hurt with your original question. Again, research, you can never have too much knowledge. So you don't have to look up, hornbeam bonsai, just look up hornbeam and find out what its growing environment, what it likes most. And you do try to replicate it if you can.
I think having a bit of an insight into what the natural growing habitat and environment of your trees is certainly a beneficial thing. It can help you to understand.
And it can certainly help when you look at how you're going to design it, because you watch and have a look at pictures and think, this is how the tree naturally is. And unless you're trying to create some would say artificial bonsai, no judgments on it, but a lot of people are trying to now stick with the natural look of the tree. So again, can't help to look at loads of pictures and try and replicate those.
That takes us to an interesting point about how different people style trees, because there are a number of different approaches. I mean, some people will wire a tree to within an inch of its life, and they're looking to very carefully position every single branch and sort of tightly control how that tree looks. And they've clearly got a very sort of stylized idea in their minds, perhaps an artistic impression of what that tree looks like. Whereas there are other bonsai developers who aim for a more naturalistic approach. And I think some of those are the people who are advocates of clip and grow as opposed to wiring. And you've got people like Walter Paul who are developing or trying to develop a more natural looking tree, as opposed to something that might be in a Japanese nursery that's much more tightly controlled and shaped.
It's a tough one. It's like any art form. Each have their genres, each have their appeals, and each have their adherents, and they're the people who say this is the right, this is wrong. There's no right or wrong. I think you have to be happy that whatever you're going to do, whether you wire it, whether you clip and grow it, whatever you do with it, just remember, this is going in my garden. This is my tree. I'm the one who's going to be looking at it. Yes, I'd love people to go, wow, that's fantastic, but it's me who's going to be looking at it. So please you. If you please you, then whether you use wire, whether you use whatever, it's not, there's no right or wrong.
I think when it comes to styling the trees, if you're the only person who's looking at it, if you're not showing the tree, then do whatever suits or pleases you.
Yeah.
Who cares?
I think the thing is with certainly with starting in the hobby, you always have a bonsai book. We've all got bonsai books. We see the classic forms, whether they're wired, they have whether they have an S shape or whether they have these different forms, and there's all sorts of there's lots of different stuff. My hands are doing this, by the way. And you can think, I have to do that. And yes, if you want to do that, then learn to do that. It's not a problem. But ultimately, you don't have to do it. The key is to keep the tree alive, actually. How you do it is up to you.
So as Xavier said at the beginning, we're not bonsai professionals. No. We're just hobbyists and enthusiasts with a number of years of experience between us. and a handful of trees. So I hope some of this has been useful to you, and let us have your thoughts in the comments below.
Down there.
And hope to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.
Cheers.
So I'm joined in the Bonsai Garden by Xavier of the Bonsai Retreat. And I think, what do I think? I don't know what I think.
Contrasting styles, different styles, but it's amazing how often we change different.
So I'm joined here by Xavier of the Bonsai Retreat, and we're going to go through some questions. I'm joined here by Xavier of the Bonsai Retreat, and we both asked for viewers to send us their questions, and we're going to rattle through some of your questions, offering a little bit of advice and our differing opinions on the answers to these. And I think what you might find interesting is how different people approach these different topics and subjects.
Trying to put some different trees in front of us.
You ready for a change?
No? Okay, you got it.